So, lesson 10 picks up off of lesson 9, where we were doing multiplication with fractions and we were using visual models to solve. So, on page 100 of your packet, it's showing us two different methods to think of the fraction that's not the operator. So, remember, the operator is that's the first fraction in the multiplication sentence. For example, right here we want to find 1/3 of 8/2, of 8 1/2. 1/3 would be the operator, and the size is 8 1/2 feet. Okay, and in class, right, we found out that sometimes this is difficult to do. So for example, if I have 8 1/2, I can rewrite that as 17/2. And if I want to find a third of it, or if I want to find a third of anything, what I would be doing is I would be splitting that thing into 3 equal groups. However, sometimes that's difficult to do, right? Like I cannot split the number 17 or 17 of anything into 3 equal groups without having anything left over, because 17 is not, divisible by 3. Well, you'll have a remainder. So what we were doing was we were thinking of it as what we see in method 2, where we can split it horizontally. Okay, so one important distinction, or the biggest distinction to make in method 1, right, is 8 1/2 feet. So they drew out 8 BMUs, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and this is a half of a BMU here. And this is difficult to work with because we're working with two sizes, right? We have wholes, or 8 1s, and we have halves. That's much more difficult than if we're just working with one size, okay, which is halves. So again, two sizes versus everything being the same size. That's the key takeaway from page 100. Okay, so moving on to page 101. Marcy had 8 1/2 feet of yellow embroidery string, her best friend's favorite color. Not sure what that means, or if that means anything relevant, but okay. She realized that she needed 2/3 of her yellow string for the bracelet. How many feet of yellow string will Marcy need to make the friendship bracelet? So my number sentence with units, remember the operator always comes first. That's 2/3 times 8 1/2 feet. Without units, that's obviously going to be 2/3 times 8 1/2. And the meaning of the number sentence, I'm find 2/3 of 8 1/2. Okay, so we should be thinking about this, right, using the sort of thinking that comes from method 2, right, where we're sort of thinking of this as 17/2. So we've got these 8 BMUs, and then we have a half here. What we will do is we'll split up these BMUs into halves. But important, you want to always label a BMU first, because when I split these, I'm going to get a different size. When I split them later, you'll see what I'm talking about. 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and this is my 17. So this altogether, right, is 17/2. So now I need to find 2/3 of that, right? Can I split 17 into 3 equal parts? No, which is why we're using this sort of modeling strategy in the first place. So we're going to split horizontally. Notice that this is the BMU, and what I said earlier, the size of it is going to change. The size is going to change, rather. So these are halves, and when I split each half into thirds, it's going to create 6. Okay, so we took 8 1/2, or 17/2, and we split it into thirds. So now we're not working with halves anymore, right? This was the BMU originally, and now there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pieces in my BMU. What that means is all of these pieces in here are sixths. Another important thing, this row, when I say row, I mean this right here. This is 1/3 of 8.5. This, or these two rows, represent 2/3 of 8.5. And this row represents the whole thing, or 3/3 of 8.5. Okay? The question is asking us for 2/3. So how many pieces are in those two rows altogether? There's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30, 32, 34. Right? There's 17 in each row, and then there's two rows. So my answer is 34/6, or I could say 5 and 4/6. So how many feet of yellow string will Marcy need? She'll need 5 and 4/6 feet of yellow string. Okay. Page 102. So, on Sunday, Uncle Jeb made a jar of peanut butter from the peanuts he bought at the store. By Wednesday, there was only 3/4 of a jar left. Suppose Uncle Jeb used the following amounts of the remaining peanut butter to make a sandwich. How much of a jar of peanut butter would Uncle Jeb use in each case? So the operator we're working with here, right? 2/5 of the remaining amount, or the amount left. Well, the problem tells us that 3/4 was left. So I'm looking for 2/5 of 3/4. And they used a jar as the unit, so I'm just going to put of a jar. Or 2/5. Oops, as number sentence. I should have put a multiplication symbol there. So 2/5 times 3/4. And the meaning, I need to find 2/5 of 3/4. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to draw a BMU. They've kind of done it for me here, but I'm going to draw my own anyway. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. Alexa, stop. So here's a BMU. I think it's a little easier to understand how to solve it this way. And I'm shading in 3/4, and I want to find 2/5 of this. So what I need to do, right? And remember, this whole thing is my BMU. So I'm splitting this into fifths, or 5 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So remember that the top row represents 1/5 of 3/4. And notice how I'm labeling it because it's very important. This second row, 2/5 of 3/4, which is what the question is asking us for, right? First things first, what size are all of these pieces? Well, I was working with fourths originally, and then I split each fourth I had into fifths, right? This was my BMU, this whole thing. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 pieces in my BMU. So all of these are 20ths. And now I need to look at how many I have shaded. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so in this case, he used 6/20ths of the jar. So something I want to mention that I think is important, you could also split this, because this is the 3/4, into fifths, but because that last fourth is not there, you might get confused about the size of the BMU. That's why I drew it over. So obviously, if we take a look at not only B, but if you take a look at C and you take a look at D, it's the exact same model, so I'm going to skip those. So B is asking you for 3/5 of the amount left in the jar. So obviously what you would be doing is you would just take these 3 rows. So you'd have, right, the answer would be 9/20. So you guys can do that on your own, and I'm going to go to the last page, right? C and D are 4/5 of the jar and 5/5 or the whole amount left over. So last but not least, question 3 for the classwork. Tammy's guinea pig weighs 2.5 pounds. Greg's guinea pig weighs 1 3/4 times as much as Tammy's guinea pig. How many pounds does Greg's guinea pig weigh? Kind of tells us what the operator is here, right? 1 3/4 times as much. So the number sentence should be 1 3/4 times 2 1/2. They're not asking us for units here, so I'm leaving pounds out. Will the answer to the story be more or less than 2.5 pounds? Obviously, it's going to be more because the operator, which is 1 3/4, is greater than 1. In parentheses, I'm going to put 1 3/4. Okay? Now, remember the all at once meaning and the by place meaning, right? So let's go for the all at once meaning. So for the all at once meaning, I might say find 7 copies of 1/4 of 2.5. It might be even better to say find 7 copies of 1/4 of 5/2. Okay, remember, we're thinking method 2, right? We want to just stick to one size. So instead of saying I'm going to find 7 copies of 1/4 of 2.5, I'll say I'm finding 7 copies of 1/4 of 5.5. You might be wondering where I got 7 copies of 1/4 from. I changed 1 3/4 to 7/4. So this is like saying 7 copies of 1/4. So this is like 7 copies of 1/4 of 5/2. Okay, now we need a diagram that follows that meaning. So here's my BMU. Okay, which means this is 1/2. I'm gonna try to draw it to the best of my ability, and I need 5/2, right? We're working with 2.5 or 5/2. So let's do that. Now I need to find 7 copies of 1/4 of this. So let's find out what 1/4 of this is, right? I need to take this and split it into fourths. So this top row represents 1/4 of 5/2. Okay, what was the BMU? Remember, this was the BMU. I should have labeled it earlier, I'm sorry. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. How many are in this row? 1 2 3 4 5. So 1/4 of 2.5 equals 5/8. So what this means for my the diagram that follows the all at once meaning, I need to draw 7 of these. Because remember, I'm finding 7 copies of 1/4 of 5/2. Well, this row represents 1/4 of 5/2. So I need 7 copies of that. Easy way to do it, just draw one row, and then you want to make extensions. So there's 5 in a row, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now you need 7 copies of that. Okay, I won't draw it, but you should have 7 copies of this, because this represents 1 copy of 1/4 of 5 halves, and you need 7 of those. So it should look like one gigantic stack. And we know that this is 5/8, so if you have 7 copies of that, you should have 35/8. So the answer should be 35/8 or 4 3/8. Right? 8, 16, 24, 32 with 3 left over. So that's the answer for D. 4 3/8 pounds. And last but not least, let's take a look at the by place meaning. Okay, so I'm going to want to find 1 copy of 2.5, and then I need to find 3/4 of 2.5. Okay, start by drawing my BMU. This is what a half looks like. So I need 1 copy of 2.5. I'm going to just draw that real quick. 5 halves, right? That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 2.5. I'm not done though, because I also, right, I've satisfied this, but I need to find 3/4 of 2.5, which means I need to draw another copy of 2.5. One, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each of these are 1/2. And I need to find 3/4 of it. So let me split it into fourths. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you should know by now that 3/4 of 2.5 is going to be these 3 rows. Okay? And remember that this is 1 BMU. Right? That's a BMU. That's a BMU, and that's half a BMU. That's 2.5. So I'm still working with eighths. And now I'm looking at the 3 rows, because each of these rows represents 1/4 of 2.5. I'll label that so you guys don't get confused. Each of these represents 1/4 of 2.5. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I have 3 rows, so that's going to be 15. And that's my model. Almost done. 15/8 plus, I'm going to change 2.5 to halves, and I'm going to say that's 5 halves. Okay, remember the relationship between these two, right? This is 4 times larger. So if I'm changing this to eighths, 4 times the number of pieces will fit into the same quantity. So this is 15/8, and this is going to be 20/8, which is going to give us 35/8, which is exactly what we got here, right? So we still got 4 3/8. Well, I'm not going to say most important takeaway, but very important takeaway. When you are asked to draw these models, you're going to get the same answer, but your model should not, they're going to look different. So, but the by place meaning, right? I found 1 copy of 2.5, so I drew that straight out. And then I had to find 3/4 of 2.5. So I drew 2.5 again, and then I needed to split it into fourths and take 3/4 of it. Okay? With the all at once meaning, I'm changing the operator to an improper fraction, because that's telling me how many copies. For example, this is telling me that I need 7 copies of 1/4 of 2.5. So once I find what 1/4 of 2.5 is, I just go straight to drawing 7 copies of that. So your model is going to be like one huge stack, whereas this, it's going to be like one copy or two, however many the operator tells you, plus an additional thing. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know and just contact me. All right, ciao.